show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Never believe fully in anybody else's BS. I don't care if it's Roger Nish, the Pope, L. Ron Hubbard, Al Gore, George Bush, or I don't care who it is. Don't swallow all their belief system totally. Don't accept all of their bullshit, all their BS. The second rule is like unto the first. Don't believe totally in your own BS. Which means that, as Bucky Fuller said, the universe consists of non-simultaneously apprehended events. Non-simultaneously. The universe consists of non-simultaneously apprehended events, which means any belief system or reality tunnel you've got right now is going to have to be revised and updated as you continue to apprehend new events later in time, not simultaneously. This is the natural functioning of the human brain. It's the way children's brains perform before they're wrecked by the school system. It's the way the minds of all great scientists and artists work. But once you have a belief system, everything that comes in either gets ignored if it doesn't fit the belief system, or it gets distorted enough so that it can fit into the belief system. You got to be continually revising your map of the world.
Okay. Take it out.
Yeah, take it out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and take it out here behind the scenes. My name's Jay Katz, and of course, this is my beautiful wife, Aspasia. We're at episode 63.
We are.
Happy New Year, 2024.
Here we
and
go.
We're going into it with a real bang. The number of this episode, of course, is 63. I said that before. It's Spy versus Spy. And we have the extraordinary Haydn Keenan with us, who is one of the most profound people we've ever come across.
Absolutely.
This man is a producer, director,
Yep.
screenwriter,
Yep.
activist, raconteur.
Yep.
He is a cinematographer.
Yep.
He is an
He's
editor.
He's an author, an all-rounder.
He was the artistic director behind this profound festival. Do you want to put that still up?
yes, that we did this year. Yep.
With Bondi Wood.
Yep.
So people keep an eye on that. There's a little YouTube site up, and it'll be back next year. Fingers crossed. This year
in October.
Gee whiz, I'm so behind the scenes.
Well, it's going to take us a couple of weeks to get into this year.
As always, even more importantly now than ever, we need to state up front here that we are broadcasting on stolen land. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We wish to show our respects and honour to elders past, present and emerging. More important now than ever. And this man's been an activist. He's been there as part of the
Tent Embassy.
The Tent Embassy, one of the documenters, if not the major documenter of that for a long time now. Now, persons of interest is the first time I'm aware of, and I'm incredibly naive, so I could be wrong, that there's been a major public profile into our intelligence services collecting files behind the scenes of people from our population that fall into the category of what I assume is minority report.
Absolutely.
What they speculate they could be capable of doing.
Yes. Because I was like we were discussing before, it's like, well, they had files on these people. So if they were doing something illegal, they would have brought them in and charged them. But clearly they weren't. But they were predicting that these people might be a problem later on. So they were keeping a file on them now. So they were doing minority report back then, who knows how long ago.
So let's stop being rude here and welcome Haydn Keenan to Down South Anomalies. And is that just speculation on our behalf, but is that the basis behind what happened with this incredible 4-part series, Persons of Interest?
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a couple of years now since Persons of Interest was finished, and we're still getting repercussions from it. I had a call yesterday from Eddie Mabo's daughter. Eddie Mabo is the leading activist who took the land rights claim to the High Court of Australia, who acknowledged that there was a different sort of land title. There's company title, there's strata title for apartment blocks, there's freehold title for individuals, and they accepted the concept that there was native title.
Right.
And Eddie attended a number of Communist Party meetings in the North Queensland, and consequently, he got a file, surveillance photographs taken of him. So, look, the reason ASIO was set up is very justified and highly acceptable. That there was a leak coming from Australia about rocket technology and atomic weapons testing that threatened the US and the UK. And while many people say, well, what's Australia got to spy on? Well, apart from the fact that we were doing nuclear tests here, we were part of the Five Eyes Pact and consequently were privy to some upper level secret information. Unfortunately, we had a completely Dad and Dave school of incompetent intelligence service left over from the First World War. And there was stuff leaking out of Australia at a rate of knots. The Americans indicated that unless we did something about it, they would cut us out of the intelligence loop. ASIO was consequently set up by, with the assistance of MI5, whose director, Sir Roger Hollis, was claimed to be one of the KGB operatives.
So he was the leaker.
Burgess, Philby, and McLean. There's no evidence to support that, but the gossip still continues, and it's quite a sexy bit where a KGB agent sets up Australia's intelligence service. So what basically happened is that within about 2 years, ASIO very effectively did its job, and with the exception of one agent, they basically cleaned out the whole network that was operating in Canberra.
The rat's nest.
And like a good bureaucracy, they had to then work out what to do next to avoid their annual budget being decreased. And the first job of every bureaucracy is to increase its jurisdiction and its budget. Its second job is education, defence, whatever it is. And as the eminent intelligence researcher and academic David McKnight said to me, forget 007 when I was getting underway with persons of interest, forget spy versus spy, all that stuff. Think government bureaucracy. And the sooner you get that into your head, the sooner you will start to understand how they work. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So listen, Haydn, maybe at this point it's really good for our international viewers and listeners to explain what ASIO just is. And I mean, ASIO is not one of the only intelligence services running out of Australia. There's ASIS, and I take it there's numerous others. But just maybe tell our international viewers and listeners what ASIO stands for and what it is.
ASIO is the Australian Security and Intelligence Organisation. ASIS is the Australian Security and Intelligence Service. ASIO, like MI5, is commissioned with keeping an eye on security within the borders of Australia.
Right.
ASIS, like MI6, is commissioned to eavesdrop, spy, etc., outside the borders of Australia, and they generally they don't overlap at all. So ASIO's job is to look for subversives, is to look for people who would overthrow the state using violence, and it looks for threats to the state within our borders, as MI5 did, etc. Unfortunately, what started to happen during the Cold War is that to maintain its position, we had a conservative government from 1949 through to 1972. And as I said, they had been very successful in cleaning out the KGB ring that was operating out of our capital, Canberra, within about 3 or 4 years of the establishment of the organisation. So after that, they then started to, I suppose it's not too much to say they became a research arm for the Conservative government, as they did in many cases in the US and the UK, where they were spying on people who were in any shape or form left of centre. That can include the Council for Civil Liberties. In the end, they started to spy on people who dissented from government policy.
Yeah.
And that becomes a major threat to democracy. You know,
Absolutely.
Artists were being vetted before they got grants to write books or paint paintings or make movies and write, you know, stage theatre pieces. So you ended up with a never-ending waterfall of people. You could get a file by writing a letter to the editor of a major newspaper. There were people who got files for writing in the 70s to the Sydney Morning Herald advocating the changes to the drug laws and saying marijuana should be legalised. You could get a file there was one, I can recall one in 1954 at a primary school where a mother of one of the children asked why they should put up colourful bunting around the school for Queen Elizabeth II's visit in 1954. That was enough to get her a file.
On the file.
Yeah, so you ended up with the most absurd criteria for getting a file, and the intelligence service, like many of them, worked on a system called the mosaic theory, and that theory is based on the concept that nothing is irrelevant. So even the most mundane piece of trivia will finally be revealed as the keystone in the great plot to overthrow the state when all the pieces of the mosaic are put into place and the whole picture emerges.
Have they ever seen the whole picture? Have we ever gotten the whole picture?
Well, the problem is that there was so much information coming in that there was no capacity to really analyse it. So you ended up with just all this raw information pouring in from agents and people who were out in the community, but that they just didn't have the capacity to analyse it,
filter it
into the mosaic.
Yeah.
So you ended up with just this vaguely incompetent, vaguely threatening landscape, whereby, you know, they had agents in every Communist Party branch. I mean, in fact, the irony would be, as the Communist Party collapsed, I would assume that the last people to leave the Communist Party would be the intelligence service.
The infiltrators.
Who would have been, come on, guys, we can keep doing it, keep going. Let's not toss it in now, just because there's 4 of us left. 3 of whom were probably ASIO officers, because you never knew who else in the room was also an agent. An agent is an unpaid supplier of information. An officer is an employed, paid handler of agents. And usually they would recruit agents, usually coming out of the armed services or coming out of university where they'd been in the reserve militia at university, and they'd often front you and say, how would you like to help your country?
Yeah.
And if you reply yes, your life will be abused, used, and you will be dumped as seen fit by the agents, the officers and the agency. The agents that we've met were people who replied yes to that question and were drawn into a web where they lost their marriages, they were isolated in their communities, they were dumped when it suited the organisation. So what you ended up with is these agents at universities, at clubs and associations, particularly in our community, in multicultural places, the Yugoslavian, the Greek,
you got to watch them. You got to watch those foreigners.
Society from the Greeks. There are a lot of Greek communists here. And in fact, when you see the May Day marches that ASIO photographed and filmed, you can see the history of multiculturalism, and you can see the history of multicultural dissent with, Greek, Italian, Spanish, Yugoslav, not Yugoslav, all those prior were the lefties and communists on the run. Yeah. And from the Yugoslavs, it was the right-wingers on the run from Tito and the communists. Yeah. So usually that's what makes our country so great, is it's full of people who are on the run for one reason or another. So
look, I went to. Can I just tell you quickly? I went to my parents belonged to the association from their village, and the first time I went with my dad, he
that was a Greek association.
A Greek association, from my parents' village, which I'm on the committee on now. Probably got a file on me. But when people were coming in, I was like to my dad, "Oh, who's he or who's she?" And he'd say, they're fascists. Their family were fascists. They were fascists, back in the day in the village. And they're still, my dad still considers them fascists. And then the next person would walk in, I go, what about that one, Dad? He goes, oh, yeah, they're communists. They're good people. They were the rebels. It was that. So if you were Greek, like to my mum and dad, you're either a fascist or a communist. There was nothing else.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It's one or the other.
Well, it got down to, places like the Sydney and Melbourne film festivals have files because they were showing Chinese and Russian films by the, Sergei Eisenstein. And you didn't have to do much at all. And one of the problems was that their budgets went up the more the threat they could present was defined. So as the
so there was an incentive there.
Of course, there's an incentive there. Yeah.
Good heavens.
If they said that they cleaned everybody out, everybody was fine, people were here just to live their life and get on with it, raise their families and just be prosperous, then their whole bureaucracy would disappear, you see. So they had to keep, saying that there was these people could be a threat, they could be a threat, it is Minority Report,
So that said, I have no doubt that there were people out and about who would do us ill.
For sure.
I have no doubt about that. And a recording that I got that ASIO spent 40 years trying to find was of a man called Claude, who that was his code name, talking to the head of the Communist Party of Australia, Laurie Aarons, in which he admitted what he did. And he supplied information to the Russian intelligence officers at the embassy. And in the case of an uprising, he would have been involved in overthrowing the Australian government. So I have no doubt about that. The thing that is concerning is when you realize that hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, and hundreds of thousands of man hours were put into surveilling university students, surveilling people who had no capacity to do anything. And one ASIO officer retired, who we convinced to speak to us in shadow, said, look, the problem you face with these things is you have to ask, how many are there? Do they have any weapons? And what capacity do they have to act out their ideologies? It was not illegal to call for the overthrow of the state. That's not illegal. It is illegal.
Democracy.
It's illegal to act on that.
Yes.
To take up arms. And as he said, at that stage, probably the most radical university in Australia was Monash University in Melbourne. And there was probably 150 students. I mean, I could be wrong, but it was not many. But all they had to do was cough, and they'd be on the front page of the Murdoch newspapers.
Right.
Threat to the state. Albert Langer and his cohort from Monash want to overthrow the state. Now, the interesting thing there was that Melbourne and Sydney, which were called the Sandstone Universities, were filled with people whose parents had been lawyers, whose parents had been doctors, whose parents had been architects. And by the 1960s, the post-war generation, either born here or arrived very early of migrants, were coming through the secondary school system. And unlike their parents, they were not going to work in factories. They were getting a tertiary education, and universities had to be built. So in Melbourne, it was Monash and La Trobe. In Sydney, it was Macquarie and University of New South Wales. And no wonder that the descendants of Greek factory workers, etc., were a lot more radical than the descendants of Sydney lawyers and doctors. So these new universities became hotbeds of intrigue, but they had no capacity whatsoever. And as the officer said, really what should have been happening was you have someone in there in a holding role and just keep your eye on them. It does not warrant spending lots and lots of money and lots of time, except if you want to help keep your patron, the Conservative government, in power.
Yeah.
And that's where they started to go wrong, because the facts are that the information we were given inside our documentary is that the KGB had penetrated ASIO, possibly to the height of second in command.
Wow.
As they had penetrated the MI5 and the CIA. KGB came out of the Russian military intelligence services in the Second World War, and they were the gun agency in the world. They beat everyone, hands down. And at no stage did any inquiry by the ASIO find a KGB officer within its ranks. The investigations were summarily shut down. They were headed off into the woods. And that backs up a couple of officers who told me that the reason for that was that the person who was shutting the investigation down was the KGB officer.
God.
Of course.
So,
but you know what, Haydn, none of this stuff happens in true isolation. You mentioned MI5 there, and you mentioned that notion of the mosaic. That just triggered in me Christopher Boyce. The film "The Falcon and the Snowman" speaks about Boyce. And Boyce was intercepting, was part of the CIA's electronic intercept, which worked in tandem with Pine Gap, which turned out to be a first strike target here. And there was a program already in place by the Central Intelligence Agency, the NSA, what had come out of the ashes of the OSS. and that program was called COINTELPRO. And that was a program that set out to actually paint dissidents, to create chaos and confusion. Now, you can't tell me with what happened to Lionel Murphy and what happened with the Whitlam government that COINTELPRO hadn't come down here and infected our ASIO and ASIS agents in some way or another.
Well, quite possibly not. I mean, the dilemma with that is that with the arrival of the left-wing Labor government in 1972, ASIO had a new master. Unfortunately, almost all the Labor Party cabinet had ASIO files because the intelligence service had been spying on them since 1949, and now they were in charge. And there's
a dilemma for you.
Well, it was because the person in charge from the executive was the Attorney General, is in charge of the intelligence service in those days. And that was Lionel Murphy, who they believed was a communist because he was married to a woman from Yugoslavia.
Oh, my God.
And Lionel Murphy demanded to see the files of the most dangerous people in Australia and was presented with three files. The file of Bob Gould, who ran a left-wing bookshop in Goulburn Street in Sydney, Albert Langer, who was an undiagnosed Asperger's genius of statistics and the left wing, who believes that Pol Pot got a bad name because of John Pilger's reporting, and a Polish count who lived in Sydney. And having been given these three files, he said, "Are these the people that threaten the state?" That, yes, sir. He said, "I know these people." And he immediately, at that point, cancelled all phone interceptions all over Australia and said, "We need to have another look at this. We need to go back to square one and start again," which put him offside with ASIO, which led to him going into the ASIO central office in Canberra at 7 a.m. one morning and demanding access. No one has access to intelligence files, particularly politicians. They get reductions, they get analysis. They don't get the raw files. And Murphy went to M for Murphy initially. His principal private secretary was a woman called Maureen Barron, and there's a fantastic story to be told yet. He then jumped on a plane and went down to Melbourne and did the same down there. It was all reported by editor-at-large Jack Waterford from the Canberra Times. So Murphy created some pretty solid enemies. But it led to a royal commission that Peter Barber, who became the new ASIO director, and it really ASIO started to change at that point because in the end, the people they were chasing had no capacity. They had it was all hot air. And I had a file where the Prime Minister, John Gorton, asked the Director General of ASIO for how many people were in the Communist Party of Australia. And the report went back from the Director General, don't quote me, but around about 2,000, Prime Minister. There are 1,300 in the Communist Party of Australia. There's 500 in the CPA-ML, which is the Maoist Chinese line. So one was the Moscow line, one was the China line, and there are 200 Trotskyists. They all hate each other. And they were so busy fighting each other that they had no capacity to take over a football ground, let alone the state. But within a week, on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, John Gorton is quoted as saying, "Communist threat to the state." When he knew that there were less than 2,000 in the whole country and they were all busy fighting each other. The bulk of it was a complete beat up. So in 1934, the Communist Internationale declared that every communist party around the world should support their local Indigenous people's quest for social justice and land rights.
Mm.
And consequently, in Australia, the struggle for land rights was regarded as a front for the Communist Party of Australia. And files were opened on every blackfella who demanded equity, land, and justice for the First Nations people of Australia. And a good friend of mine happened to be one of those people, Gary Foley from Melbourne. And Gary, I was at his place in Melbourne one day, and he said, "Oh, have a look at this." And he pulled out this claret-stained, dog-eared folder. I said, "Have a look." And I said, "Oh, what is it?" And he said, "Oh, turn to page 35." And I turned to page 35, and there I read a report of Gary Foley and a number of other Indigenous activists planning to blow up Captain Cook's replica ship, the New Endeavour, in Darling Harbour, in Sydney Harbour. And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "It's my ASIO file." And I said, "Oh, wow. How did you get that?" He said, "It's easy. Anyone can get their file. After 25 years and now 20 years, they have to hand it over. They might black out certain bits, but you can get your file." So
is that a 4-year release? Is that a 4-year release? Is that a Freedom of Information Act release? Or
no, it's not. No, ASIO is not bound by the Freedom of Information Act.
So you've
it's
got to
under the
request it.
Archives Act, which Prime Minister Hawke brought in, which is, you've got to say, one of the few decent things he did, given that everyone thought he was the CIA mole in the overthrow of the Whitlam government. Access to people is, I can apply for yours. You don't know I've applied for it. And secondly, you can't stop me getting it. So I thought this could be interesting. And I went down to Canberra, and if anyone has got any interest and wants a fantastic holiday, go to the National Archives. And before you know it, they're closing up for the day because you've just had this wonderful, wonderful experience of reading people's ASIO files. And you can read whether it be feminist Germaine Greer, cabinet ministers, sporting heroes, Gary Shearston, the folk singer I Get No Kick From, cocaine, mere alcohol, and he had one too. People who advocated Australian music, Australian literature, Australian theatre, Australian movies, all got one. So as you read the file, if I come across the name J. Katz and above that there is a K with a number, I then know that J. Katz has got a file. So while I keep reading Aspasia's file, and I see that, you know, she's having a fight with J. Katz about his chronic indolence, I then see, I go to the desk and say, "Could I get J. Katz's file?" And about an hour and a half later, up comes J. Katz's file. And you end up in it's like Spotify or Netflix.
Yeah, right.
If you like this file, you might also like
to read this file.
It's incredible. And you just take notes. It's a wonderful holiday. And ASIO files take the form of two strands. One is about J. Katz, and the second is about the people, and the second is about subjects. So J. Katz and Aspasia may have a file each, and although for her file will be her maiden name. If she gets married, they still keep her maiden name even if she changes her name. But the other strand is subjects, and they're fantastic. So I could put in strange incidents in Southern Hemisphere, and up will come a file on the podcast Strange Incidents in Southern Hemisphere. Or I can put in land rights, women's electoral lobby, Australian literature, and up will come these things about a subject. And inside the subject, you will then see names of writers or whoever, and you then go back out and see their name. Oh, can I have the file of whoever.
So-and-so.
So it's a really wonderful, wonderful, you go down the greatest rabbit hole. And in the end, our series of 4 hours, we picked 4 people and got their files. And we picked 4 people who would, one, have the breadth of ASIO files. So they were not all communists. There was First Nations activists. There was, etc. So we didn't want just communists, but we also wanted people who would show us the history of ASIO from 1949 through to what's called the end of the open period. And each year the open period goes forward 1 year. It's 20 years backwards. So at the moment it's up to 2003. So when we were finishing, it was about 1985 because it was 30 years at that period.
Right.
So we wanted something that would show the rise of ASIO, its gradual, tiny changes from hunting down subversives to hunting down dissidents.
Yeah.
And that was a critical change. And in the end, as the officer said to us when I showed him the page of the Gary Foley's file, he said the problem you face since 9/11 is that the biggest winners from 9/11, apart from the people doing the metal detecting machines at airports, who I assume were sponsoring Al Qaeda, because they are the ones who truly made millions out of
the profit out of it.
the World Trade Center. The other ones who have just done so brilliantly out of that Al Qaeda attack is the intelligence services all around the world.
Absolutely.
And ASIO's budget went up 8 times.
Skyrocketed.
Their staff went up 4 times. Now, as the ASIO officer said to me, after 9/11, what you end up with, if their staff's gone up 4 times, you end up with 75% of the staff with very little experience.
Yeah, right.
And you have political masters saying, don't tell me there's no threat. I've just given you 8 times the budget. I want heads on pikes outside the city gates. Go and find people.
Yeah, right.
So when I gave him the page about Gary Foley wanting to blow up Captain Cook's ship in Sydney Harbour, he said the difference between me and a first-timer is that I look at this page and I look up the top and I can see it's C3, category C3. Now, C, A, B, and C. C means the person is not a particularly reliable source. 3 means it's hearsay. So this document, to start with, is not a transcript of a tape recording. It's not literal. And then I look at who's there, and then I look at the location. And the location is the Toxteth Hotel, a pub in Sydney, in Glebe in Sydney. And he said, I know that pub. It's just around the corner from the Aboriginal educational school where they're teaching secondary school for Aboriginal kids. He said, then I looked at the day and the time. It's Friday at 5 o'clock. So I say to you, this is a group of Tranby Aboriginal College employees down at the pub getting half pissed on a Friday night talking about kicking Whitey's ass.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
So what I'd do is I would get someone on a holding pattern and say, if you get anything more like this, let me know. But until then, I'll put this in the pending tray. A first-time ASIO staff officer, just out of university, desperate to make a kill, they read it and it's a plot to blow up Captain Cook's ship.
Yeah.
This is a plan, a conspiracy to commit an act of terrorism.
And we better get a SWAT team down there.
There's a whole lot of people getting pissed on a Friday night, as most of us like to do.
Sure.
So therein lies the dilemma for these intelligence agencies all around the world. There are people who would do us ill. And, we have seen some of the people wanting to blow up the MCG or whatever.
Yeah, but what we've also got to take into consideration, our major terrorist event in this country is still a bit of a mystery, and that is the Hilton bombing.
Yeah.
And there were people that were falsely convicted for that. And if I can digress back to Lionel Murphy, you are so right, because what happened there was all of a sudden we started to get statements out of the US. One of the major ones was from James Jesus Angleton, who said that Lionel Murphy has actually tarnished the sacred jewels of US intelligence.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do now, Haydn, is I'm going to show a trailer for persons of interest, because it is still available on streaming sites, and you can also purchase the DVD, the hard media from you. Let's have a look at this one trailer. We'll get back to us.
Gary Edward Foley, Aboriginal activist in Sydney, has extremist tendencies. Michael Dudley Hyde, occupation, student. He is a supporter of revolution, insurrection, the violent overthrow of one class by another. Secret ASIO minute paper. 5'10", solid build, boyish appearance. Roger Millis. The chairman was Private Hardy. This speaker is by far the most emphatic I have heard.
We demand the right to self-determination.
The time of pacifism is gone.
Evaluation B, credibility 3. I consider Foley would be capable of violence.
American Independence Day became the central event.
That's true. We were going to make it as militant as hell.
You know, you never knew when you were going to be picked up or spied on or questioned in the dead of night.
It would be appreciated if you could obtain a list of the members of the jury which acquitted subject. Should any be recorded, a summary of their file would also be appreciated.
And this is just another example of the filth of their material generally, as far as I'm concerned.
And with the Aborigines, because it was the communists who believed in equality, the communists who believed that black and white could live together, the communists who believed that Aborigines should get equal pay, suddenly that had to be evil.
Everybody who's got an ASIO file from those days, within those files are some of the most scurrilous and outrageous accusations made against people and left on the files as a note, and are still there today in many instances. It's a scandal.
Our series tells a few of the stories from the previously secret intelligence files of these persons of interest.
Okay, just a couple of questions here, Haydn. Is there a file on you?
I didn't ask. I mean,
why not?
Because we already had clogged up the system. They hated us particularly once the series came out, people realised they could apply for their files. But there's nothing so humiliating as seeing yourself as a dead set threat to the state and not having a file. What do you mean I haven't got a file? I'm a threat to the state. It's horrendous.
And so you're better off not going there.
Yeah.
Philip Adams, the well-known broadcaster here, he never stops going on about his ASIO file. He was a member of the Communist Party. His file is 8 pages.
Oh, right.
And the beginning of every ASIO file is about 5 pages where they identify you.
Right.
And it's purely admin: height, weight, colour, residence, etc., etc. So there's about 3 pages on him.
That's pretty sad.
That said, my wife, who her father was in the Communist Party, offspring of members of the party, get a file when they turn 13.
Wow.
They don't do anything. So ASIO contacted the editorial desk at the Sydney Morning Herald when my wife applied for a job as a copy girl aged 15 to let them know that she was the daughter of a member of the Communist Party. And that's what was happening all around the country, where you would find you, after 3 or 4 weeks in a job, you'd be sacked.
Yeah, right.
And really, one of the things that I found that was so shocking, in many ways, in the old days, the convict scar was a sense of shame for Australians.
Yeah.
Now, have convict ancestry is a pride. To have Aboriginal blood, the same. It was a sense of shame. Now it's a sense of pride. And the only other one is that every self-respecting pol sci lecturer or activist or writer, whatever, has to have an ASIO file if they're going to have any credibility.
Yeah, right.
And they broadcast that, and it actually aids their careers.
Wow.
The ones who it doesn't is people like journalist Roger Millis's wife, Susie Millis, who every time she got a job as a typist, she'd get the sack 3 or 4 weeks later for years. And she came to think that she was too stupid to hold down a job as a frigging typist.
Oh, that's frightening.
When you got her file, you realised that she had a file because she was an amateur actor in Sydney's Newtown New Theatre, and that was enough to get you a file. And every time she got a job, she'd get the sack. And it was only when she applied for her file 30 years later that she realised how her life had been blighted by having a file. All the rest of them, the Gary Foleys and the, hey, I've got a file, baby, and it's this thing, you know. So it's great for them, but it's the little ones who get popped up by the machine and get sacked and can't hold down a job.
Literally blacklisted.
Yeah, well, you are.
That's the tragedy of it, you know. It's the,
so who knows?
Vernacular.
Yeah, who knows how many people who'd had files on them that shouldn't have had a file on them, right? Because they were either, you know, through osmosis to someone or you know, some sort of, you know, tentative relationship that they got a file on them, and how it actually affected their whole life, you know, their working life, their social life, you know. So
it was,
I don't know.
The files are, I mean, Australia in the 70s, 80s had 15 million people, and the word I got from a reliable source is that there were 500,000 ASIO files.
Wow.
So that's a pretty high percentage of the total population that have got a file, you know. And the number of people who have been damaged by these things, I think is pretty significant. And generally they're the people you never hear of. They're the ones who aren't high profile, who aren't. That's why. One of the things that did strike me, you know, I went in thinking ASIO is really terrible, etc. And after a while, I got so bored with the narcissism of hardcore leftists. They are so vain, narcissistic. It became tedious, and I started to think, I think they should have a file on you, you asshole. So I did start to, as some of the documentary, after a while, it starts to lead you. And as I said, I spent 7 years making this series, and I started to not lose my grip on reality, but I was so deeply immersed in this. I knew so many files, and one of the things we did was we discovered about 150 hours of previously unrecorded 16mm surveillance film.
Oh, yeah.
Unshown. Now, we have a piece of that here from you, which is just there. It's a KGB operation in Sydney. Now, here's the fascinating thing. I was very much a lover of independent cinema, and that's how I came across you. You're one of the greatest maverick directors this country ever has. I don't think we've got anything close to you than John Waters in the world, really. And I mean, I say that.
My hero.
I say that because you embody everything about that man, a sense of integrity, a sense of humor, and a caustic,
a sense of absurdity.
and a caustic view of the world we live in. But I can remember in the late 70s going to a great cinema, which just happened to be the first hall in the entire continent that an Indigenous protest occurred in, which was the Mandolin Cinema.
Yeah,
and Chris
which is
Rule,
now the Australia Hall, the Australia.
So Chris Rule, who was there managing that cinema, had numerous nights where KGB agents would appear out of nowhere and throw people down the stairs of that cinema during certain screenings. They would literally tear the screen down. Now, this footage we've got has got no sound, so let's roll it, and your mic will still be on. You can commentate underneath. This is fascinating. And this reminds me of the incredible work that Peter Doyle did at the Crime and Justice Museum with all those stills. This is of the same caliber. This is incredibly valuable in terms of our own history. And this is here in Sydney where we are.
It is. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is in the main street of Collaroy, a surf beachside suburb in northern Sydney. And we're going to see a KGB officer, Skripov, Ivan Skripov, and he has made contact with a New Zealand woman who, unfortunately for him, has gone to ASIO and told him that she's been approached by an intelligence service. So here's Skripov, sartorially dressed, going past a late night milk bar and one of those wonderful Australian Chinese restaurants.
The Golden Rose.
Are they using a 16mm hand wound Bolex, do you think, here?
Or an Araflex ST, one of the two.
Right, okay.
Most of them, it was, if they got it right, it was just pure luck. And occasionally, incredibly, they actually shoot something that has an aesthetic that is quite astounding. Now, he has met the woman, and I'm trying to think of what her name is, and he's priming her to become an agent. And there are a series of meetings that take place at Taronga Park Zoo, at this one at Collaroy. There's another one at Birrell Street in Bondi Junction. And the thing that I found fascinating as I went into this is that man there in the fish shop doesn't realise there's a KGB operation happening outside his shop.
Right.
I mean, these people look innocuous. Just looks like a couple on a date.
So do you know, like, why he targeted that woman? What was she going to be able to provide?
There was something I'm trying to think at the moment. Forgive me. Right. It's a little the detail, but there was something. She was working in a sensitive communications area, but here he can't help but stop. Look, the fried rice here, I just love it. And
they make a really special fried rice.
I'll split the bill with you. Is that all right? Well, I mean, surely if you want me to spy for you, you could pay. And all right then, but just don't go with the Peking duck, all right? So let's have a look at the Golden Rose, which I really do recommend, and the banana fritters and ice cream. No. I will not tolerate that. Western Imperial. So we've had the meal. We're now going past the well-known Collaroy haberdasher, and we're a bit underexposed here. That's why there's no blacks in this.
Yeah, right.
But still very stoic in terms of...
And now you see he's finished the job, and now you see, watch it, and now he turns back to see, is she walking away? Is she meeting anyone else?
Okay. Wow.
So
that was astounding. That was incredible commentary there. You don't get that on Criterion, you know.
So what ended up happening is he gave her a 35mm, where is it? There. Oh, I can't, I'm getting it all out of whack here. Yeah. Canister of film to deliver to Adelaide. And it was a test. And
Right.
she delivered that little 35mm canister of film to ASIO, and they X-rayed it. And inside the canister, you could see a very high-powered spring and some powder, so that when you undid the lid, the spring would fire out, and there's no way you could get the lid back on. So they wanted to see whether she would take
Would
this
open
to
it.
Adelaide
Right.
unopened, and then she'd pass that test. So the incredible thing was that they used dead letter drops on the stairs at Macalone Stairs going down to Garden Island from King's Cross. They used, they met in Birrell Street in Bondi Junction. The thing that really struck me is that we think nothing like this happens in Australia. There you are, serving them the banana fritters and ice cream, and they just look like a middle-aged couple in your Coleroy Chinese restaurant, when in fact it is a KGB operation. And they happen, as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, I love the idea of, in some of the other ones, you can see, you know, little girls with their prams and their mums waiting at the red light to cross the street, and Skripov is standing right next to them. And I love that the tension, the unknown tension between a little girl and her mum, not realizing that there is a major KGB operation happening that far from them. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And I've actually got all the film they shot on Skripov, and I'm tempted to try and cut it all together and get someone to host it and have a chat, but to throw some light on this. In many ways, one of the things that struck me with the surveillance film is you start to get to know people. And because I was spending 70 hours a week doing this, they became real to me. And when cinema was first invented, one of the concerns that people had is that you would be taking some of the person's spirit.
Right.
And they would be trapped in the film, forever turning, forever coming out of the doorway, forever. And it started to become real for me. And there's a place in Melbourne, it was the Amalgamated Railway Workers Union, a communist union. And it's the most beautiful 16mm black and white. And a man in his 60s comes out in braces with those old pleated post-World War II pants, and he's got a cigarette in his mouth, and he looks up and down the street, and he flicks it into the gutter, and he walks back in. And forevermore, I was watching it 60 years later. He must be dead by the time I was watching it. But forevermore, he comes out of that doorway, trapped in this haunted arcade of flickering images, to throw that butt into the street and then quietly go back into the building. And I had an experience. I went to Melbourne to attend the funeral of Australian screen legend Bill Hunter at the Prince's Theatre. And I got the bus from the airport, and I was walking up one of the main streets, Burke Street in Melbourne. And as I did, I looked across the road, and I had a penchant for taking LSD when I was younger. And I had
That's probably in your file.
I had a true acid flashback. And the whole scene started to move into black and white, out of color. Wow. And because I'd experienced this before, I thought, great, this is a freebie. And as I looked across the road, there was the Amalgamated Railway Union building, which was now a city hotel. And from that door came the old man with the cigarette and the braces. And as I stood there looking at it, I thought, this is the shot.
Yeah.
This is where ASIO must have been, one floor up, because I was looking straight at it. And it was one of those moments where now I can walk around the city and I can see the vantage points that ASIO had in the town hall looking down on Vietnam protests, in Maya, in Woolworths, looking down on anti-Vietnam protests and May Day marches. And so you can see these places, particularly in Sydney. There was a one they used a lot in the offices of Hoyt's Cinemas in George Street. And Hoyt's was a wholly owned subsidiary of 20th Century Fox, who were major proponents in the House Un-American Activities Committee,
right,
working with McCarthy in the US, and ran outrageous anti-communist propaganda stuff.
Horrible what they did.
And had, for me, a tragic effect on a mentor of mine, a wonderful, wonderful filmmaker called Cecil Holmes, who was a member of the Communist Party and got blackballed for 15 years. He made 2 feature films, wonderful films, with Frank Hardy, one of them, and another one was a bushranger film, which the return of the story of Captain Thunderbolt, who was a sort of a Robin Hood figure in the north of New South Wales, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. And Cecil was drummed out of the film industry. The sick, perverse thing is that when the New South Wales government gave Rupert Murdoch 100 hectares of land in Sydney on the old showgrounds to turn into a film studio, charged for 99 years approximately $10,000 a year. That's all.
Wow.
They named one of the streets Cecil Holmes Drive.
Right.
Fox Entertainment called one of the streets inside the Fox studio Cecil Holmes Drive, who Fox had been involved in.
What an obscenity.
Destroyed his life.
The circle of perversion was completed, you know.
Yeah. Wow.
You know what? We have a secondary trailer here that's just as interesting. I'm going to play that now as well because it just sheds light on a bit more material within this extraordinary series that you did.
There are 2 kinds of history. Official history, the kind which is taught in schools. Then there's secret history, a scandalous kind of history which explains how things really happened.
Operation Bossa Nova, January 24th, 1969. Communist Party, special National Executive Meeting from an ASIO microphone in the meeting room.
The time of pacifism is gone.
Evaluation B, credibility 3. Alan was discussing with Newfong and Foley plans for the blowing up of the ship Endeavour. I consider Foley would be capable of violence.
Looking at my ASIO file, I think that's where they sort of really started to get serious and think that we were some sort of terrorists. The Black Caucus in Redfern ran such a tight inner circle that it was impossible for ASIO to infiltrate it.
They traced my personal life right down to the nth degree.
They took every opportunity to damage the careers of the Millis family. Regarded as subversive and possibly KGB spies, they were watched and their lives recorded in detail. And slowly, these files changed their lives.
Michael Dudley Hyde, occupation, student. He is a supporter of revolution, insurrection, the violent overthrow of one class by another.
When you actually took on state power, you were going to pay. You were not, you know, they weren't just going to lay down and let you take society over. You know, you never knew when you were going to be picked up or spied on or questioned in the dead of night.
Frank Hardy was the public face of communism in Australia. Even during the Cold War, he proudly proclaimed his communist beliefs. He would become the most famous and controversial writer in the country. His books banned, and Hardy himself arrested and tried for criminal libel.
It would be appreciated if you could obtain a list of the members of the jury which acquitted subject. Should any be recorded, a summary of their file would also be appreciated.
And this is just another example of the filth of their material generally, as far as I'm concerned.
Our series tells a few of the stories from the previously secret intelligence files of these persons of interest.
That is so beautifully shot. That's so incredibly narrated by you. I take it it's edited by you. The whole lot's done by you. One man against the world.
Look, I've got to say the majority of the editing was done by a couple of really wonderful local editors, and I did the final polish on it. But I think, you know, when you see that stuff where, you know, the Frank Hardy was charged with criminal libel, and when he was acquitted, the ASIO Director General asked for a check on all the members of the jury.
Yeah,
that's just files, you know.
That is a total surveillance state. It's such a the communist stuff, you know, Stasi, KGB, you know. They can't see that what they're doing is exactly what they keep trying to fight.
Well, I've got to say that the person who was indicated to me was the KGB officer. We almost had him agreeing to be interviewed, and he pulled out the day before. Most of the people who agreed to talk pulled out the day before. But this bloke was really smart. He was cosmopolitan, and he said, we'd have a great Christmas party with the KGB, you know, because we're both in the same business.
Yes.
We're both in the business of keeping the status quo,
whatever
the system was, you know.
Yeah, but it's these systems are always really conservative, draconian systems. How do these people? It's like, okay, so for a long time there was a very, you know, conservative government, and then when, you know, Whitlam got in, things changed. But how much did ASIO change? Did it really, really change? Did he get in there and fire everybody out of there and go, right, we're cleaning this out, this has got to stop? Or did it just keep going?
They did change their charter, and the charter in the late 70s, early 80s. So it had to be politically motivated violence.
Right.
It wasn't sedition.
Right.
Sedition was too woolly and too easy. So it moved to politically motivated violence. So there was a change, I have to say. That said, you know, they certainly benefited from the Hilton bombing. You know, there were a number of inquiries into ASIO that were cancelled due to the bombing and the need to get on with trying to find who did it. And, you know, there was a chap I know, Tim Anderson, was you know, framed up on that.
Railroaded. Absolutely.
And when you see the file on Ananda Marga, I read the files up to 6 weeks before the bombing because that was all I could read. And ASIO was saying, we can't find anything that indicates this mob or anything other than a loudmouth yoga group.
Don't you think that was oddly
on Amanda Marga?
But there was oddly like Patty Hearst, you know, the Amanda Marga was like the Symbionese Liberation Army. I mean, what in the hell was that? Where did it come from? Did someone just put it together late at night on a joint? You know, it's just ridiculous stuff and incredibly similar.
Yes.
So they must have still kept going like that. You know, they were still very conservative. Those organisations are always so conservative.
Well, well, in the sense that, I mean, they might be, but they're radically conservative at their worst. You know, they're opening files on anyone who.
That's what I mean. They're not really doing a real job. They're just. You know, there's communists under every bed. You know what I mean?
If it's not communists, it's
well,
Islamic
whatever.
terrorists.
Yeah, well, threats,
It's so. I mean, I think Michael Kirby, the High Court judge who had a file on himself because he was in the Council for Civil Liberties, said a healthy skepticism is a really good thing to have when and the statements by politicians, intelligence services, a healthy skepticism should not go amiss, because when you read your file, they are dark biographies by someone who neither likes you nor trusts you.
Yeah.
And if you don't speak, you've got something to hide, and if you do speak, you're lying.
Yeah.
And they are these strange biographies, which is why we opened the series with an uncredited quote from the French writer Balzac. There are two kinds of history. There's the history they teach in schools, but there's another kind of history, a scandalous history that tells how things really happened.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, the ASIO files actually tell you what really happened, because they're really good at times and dates and all that stuff. And you actually see, when you read enough of them, you can actually see what's going on. The whole communist conspiracy, in 95% of it, is a con. The student revolution, this is a group of kids coming to maturity without the trauma of World War or depression, who are questioning everything.
Yes.
And as teenagers do. And, the guy who was the KGB guy, it was such a shame, because he was not World War II. Most of the initial officers came in from World War II because they'd been in military intelligence, or their parents had been in the diplomatic corps, and they got what was called a tap on the shoulder.
Right.
And that's how they recruited. But down the track, a younger generation started to come through, and this bloke was one of them, university educated, etc. And he said, I was on duty as a 23-year-old, taking down names and, addresses and number plates at an anti-Vietnam rally. And I thought, why are we doing this? I can see the logic of why we shouldn't be in Vietnam. And when he put his report in, it was just moved sideways. It just went nowhere. So there was a group of ASIO people coming through who were starting to question the old guard, who were rabid anti-communists, unlike, many of the Communist Party, who were ex-servicemen who came back from the Second World War going, there's got to be a better way. The horrendous loss of life and deprivations that they'd seen in Europe and the Pacific, many of them came back. None of them joined the RSL because that was an extreme right-wing fuckwits. And many of them, and the Communist Party reached its peak membership around about 1948, 49, 50, as these people joined the party and believed that there had to be a better way, And funnily enough, when you look at the Communist Party, they fought for land rights for Aborigines. They fought for free education. They fought for free medical care. They fought for widows' pensions. They fought for unemployment benefits. Please, which side of history did they turn out to be on? They fucked up a few things with their, patriarchy and hierarchy.
Sure.
And ASIO was extremely effective in penetrating them, because they didn't penetrate necessarily the patriarchy. They penetrated the female typists.
The matriarchy.
And the blokes would say anything in front of the friggin' typists who were serving them tea. And the couple of the typists were ASIO agents, And it was only a new generation of young people like Jenny George and a few of the younger ones came through and said, hey, we're not just going to keep taking notes and making tea anymore. We want to say. And it was that generation came through and started to overturn the old patriarchy in the Communist Party, So it's you do see in the files, as Gary Foley said, half of us were so stoned we can't remember where we were on September the 15th, 1971. So his ASIO file is a fabulous aid memoir.
Yeah, right.
I was at that meeting for the Free
Yeah,
Palestine.
right. Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
there are two kinds of history. The one they teach in school books, but there's another kind of history, a scandalous history that tells you how things really happened.
Yeah, that's the one written by the winners. The winner's always right. That history that gets, permeated throughout
And
society.
you're so right about war. My grandfather, who lived next door, Sydney Porter, an astounding individual, he'd put his age up to go into the First World War. He was gassed in France, came back early, did a double somersault backflip. He was a poet and started to write very destructive poetry about the government, about the RSL.
Mm-hmm.
His friends of his didn't get the benefits, the support they needed. So
when they came
something
back,
I've never heard about in the public mainstream is they all protested by sleeping out in Hyde Park around the war memorial. And there were evidently hundreds of men there at that stage. And I can remember too, in the 60s, my parents were so afraid that my older brother was going to be conscripted. And
to Vietnam,
my parents were dead set against the Vietnam War, and they were conservative people at heart, but it scared the hell out of them. I just want to go to a moment here to remember our incredible Australian journalist, documentarian and writer, John Pilger, and here he is with the CIA chief, Adam Killey. Let's just have a little look at this interview, which tells you a lot about social engineering and what can happen when intelligence agencies decide to step outside of their country and interfere with the politics of others.
What right have you, when I mean you, the CIA, the United States government, or any foreign power, what right do you have to do what you do in other countries?
National security interests.
But that's a divine right, isn't it? Because the people that you do it to have no say in it.
Well, that's just tough. We are going to protect ourselves, and we're going to go on protecting ourselves because we end up protecting all of you. And let's not forget that.
Right, no, I won't.
We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it. Get used to it, world. We're not going to put up with nonsense. And if our interests are threatened, we're going to do it. Chile, the only reason it exists is because of Pinochet.
At a huge human price.
What human price? Give me a break.
The thousands who were disappeared and murdered?
Thousands? You count them. What thousands?
Well,
and
talk
to me about truth commissions.
I've seen their names in the cemetery in Santiago.
Yeah,
you're saying they're
thousands.
fakes?
They aren't thousands.
Well,
there aren't thousands, sir.
It was a period in which almost everybody in the present situation regards as a dark time, in which the CIA played a major role.
That's right. They played a major role in overthrowing, what's his name?
What's his name was Salvador Allende.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
He was democratically elected.
Right, okay.
Is that okay to overthrow a democratically elected government? Is it okay?
It depends on what your national security interests are.
Are you denying that Pinochet caused huge suffering in that country?
I don't buy. That he committed crimes, I agree.
But it's worth it.
Huh?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
those crimes are worth it?
Yeah. Sometimes, unfortunately, things have to be changed in a rather ugly way.
Now, no matter
special place in hell for that piece of crap.
Now, listen.
Seriously,
no matter what side your bread is buttered on, John Pilger was someone who would always confront authority. And the frightening thing there is that I think the U.S. ambassador, could have my history wrong here, I'm stretching way back.
He was
Marshall Green in Chile, became our U.S. ambassador directly after the death and assassination of Allende. And then we ended up losing Whitlam. And so it's really interesting when you put the dots together as well, Haydn, how that notion of intelligence and these
interfering in other.
affairs.
I mean, he's saying it right out. Democratically elected president, and he doesn't care because America's national interest, not national interest. You know what the CIA is? The CIA is the police for corporate America.
And the other
So
thing
corporate America can go into third world countries, exploit the labor and exploit the resources of those third world countries.
The other thing we should
Bang.
say here, because we've got a huge American audience and that, well,
Yeah, but
not
hey,
our
that's
podcast, but where we come from,
yeah.
is that ASIO was there as well.
Oh, I know that.
And
Absolutely.
assisted in the deposing of that incredibly brilliant
Oh, yeah.
leader and
Absolutely.
that government.
Yes.
And that is an absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
Yep. No, there's documentary evidence about that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I've read it all. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Anyway. And on that note.
So, how do people go about getting to see Persons of Interest if they haven't, and how do they purchase a hard copy, Haydn? We'll put
Look,
a
you
link
can,
to...
if you want to purchase the DVD, if you've still got a player, but it's got lots and lots of extras on it, and there's a whole lot of stuff on it that
I
you
want
won't
to
get.
purchase it.
So you can do that by going to smartstreetfilms.com.au, smartstreetfilms.com.au. That's our little production and distribution.
I'll put a link up for it. I'll put a link up
under the podcast in the show notes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can go to DocPlay, 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 and that's got the episodes, but it hasn't got the extras. And the whereas the other one's got a whole lot of surveillance films, surveillance photographs, interviews with people. So it's quite a 4-disc set. It's pretty impressive, I think. So, but look, I hope people will come out of it. ASIO at the moment, they've just moved into their massive Kafka style headquarters in Canberra, which unfortunately I think the Chinese intelligence services had the floor plans of before it was finished, in true Australian style. So there's fun and games to be had, and one hopes that an intelligence service, overseen by even a minor left-wing government, is kept on the straight and narrow, because it's really easy for these things, and you don't notice the incremental changes. Very often they're not a massive swing. They're just tiny bits, which is the story of ASIO. It's
like
just
the
moved
frog
a
in the
tiny bit
boiling
at a time,
pot.
and before you knew it, it was a research arm for the Conservative government to smear its opponents. And in doing that, it did us a disservice. It ruined a number of innocent street-level lives. And when push came to shove, I've got a file where the Director General contacted the Director General of MI5 saying that if a Labor government was elected, they would send the files to the UK and they would not hand over information to the incoming government. That is...
So who's running that organisation?
Well, they're running themselves,
right. Well, and that's your problem,
as
isn't
you
it?
said, the politicians can give them a general direction, but they can never see the files. It is, you're jeopardizing international relations, as Jamie said. The CIA said when Lionel Murphy walked into that vault and demanded to see the actual raw files, the Americans freaked out.
Yeah, they lost their
Those are the crown jewels, So and everyone else is only supposed to get compendiums, analysis,
That's a problem.
There is
Big
so
problem.
much more to this extraordinary gentleman. He really is a gentleman.
Absolutely.
He's actually become a friend of ours, and I feel very humbled by
Have
the
you
fact.
asked him that for sure?
Well, I'm pushing the point here live on air.
I'm honoured to have Sydney's leading cultural communicators as friends.
I want to play the trailer for your extraordinary work over many, many years in documenting the 10th embassy. Let's have a little look at that.
the fact that a black person in Bourke, if he sets 1 foot in a bloody pub up there, he will get his head kicked in. That is extremely offensive to me. I find very offensive the highest infant mortality rate in the world in this country amongst black kids, because they're my kids that are dying.
And we're not going to stop until every last white racist pig has had a good kick in the head. The time of pacifism is gone.
They've done things for Bangladesh, Indian people overseas, but what have you done for the blacks here? What have you done about the infant mortality rate?
We're going to continue taking to the streets when necessary. We're going to continue confronting white racist institutions wherever they may be found. This is the beginning, and it won't end till we have our land.
Whoa. And that's quite devastating in terms of what we lived through last year in the yes vote in this country, that true acknowledgement has not occurred yet. And that has been a really long project for you, Haydn.
Look, I have to say, I didn't make that film. It's made by a director named Alessandro Cavadini. But being having a DNA defect, I am a movie mogul, and consequently, we have a vertically and horizontally integrated empire, as you can see around me here, about 3 meters by 4. So we have production and distribution. So we distribute that film for Alessandro, and last year was the 50th anniversary. So we did a crowdfunding project and raised $40,000 in 3 days because the government, the scumbags, wouldn't put up a penny to preserve the film, and it was in the process of disappearing. And with the help, I've got to say, of some very generous people, including Russell Crowe, who put up a swag of money, we restored the film, and we then, it looked so good, we put it into 28 cinemas around Australia, and a new generation of people came to see it. It was a really wonderful experience, and it's something where the film's now been preserved for the next 50 years, I hope. And it's a rare social document because it's the only camera that was inside the embassy. All the rest is newsreel footage from the various TV networks. This was Alessandro Cavadini had established his credentials. He was a Marxist Italian immigrant, and he'd established his credentials with the Black Caucus, who generally were Black Panthers and Maoists, and they let him in, and they let his camera in anywhere he wanted to go. So that was an incredible privilege. And what he's come out with is a raw, rough, tough, heart-rending social document that even today, it's black and white and it's gritty, but even today it speaks eloquently.
Can people catch that online? Is there a place to go with that streaming, or can they purchase?
You can buy a beautiful disc off us at smartstreetfilms.com.au. The film's called Ningla Ana, Ningla-Ana, Ningla Ana. But I think you can also see it on SBS iView, I think is the name of their replay thing, because the thing looked so good after we got it into the cinemas, SBS picked it up. So that turned out really wonderfully, you know, and we're really proud to have done that. You know, it's one of those things where, look, I just love making films. I love making them available to people.
Mm-hmm.
And like you guys, some of the stuff that you make available to people is rare, is curated beautifully, and it's by people who love film. It's not some dry academic haute couture stuff, you know?
No, definitely not.
And it's also the fact that you care, that your films are not just like a narcissistic trope. Your films actually highlight really important issues, history that's been suppressed and hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And they also involve so much of the community around you. Now, you are certainly not one-dimensional.
No.
And you, your son, your family, your beautiful wife, you have an extraordinary career, which I think slips into the world of John Waters. And as we run out of time here on this podcast, we do have to show my wife's favorite film to champion.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
this world, which
this is the
now,
most
what year
amazing
was
film you've
Pandemonium
never
made?
seen.
What year was
1987. Is that right?
Yep, it couldn't be any more different to persons of interest. A considered sociological piece.
Yeah.
This one is.
We're going from the sublime to the ridiculous now. I'm going to, Pandemonium.
Let's have a look at this. And you can get this from Smart Street as well.
Left to die in the desert as a baby, she'd been raised by wild dogs. She'd come to find her parents. Our paths were destined to meet.
She died. Tell me, do you ever get strange vibrations in this place?
Oh, yes, all the time, Mr. Leadingham. Used to be a movie studio, you know.
Really?
The baby is alive. Have you taken your medication today, dear?
I'm Leadingham. Kale's Leadingham.
I was falling in love with a dingo. The place was cursed. We were surrounded by monsters. Behind each door lurked blood-sucking freaks.
Whatever dark secrets lie buried beneath this place, they will rise up tonight, and we will be forced to act them out.
We are gathered here to join these two in unholy matrimony.
It's about the girl. She's coming back if she isn't here already.
I knew I was different from the rest of the litter.
Very good. Very, 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 very good. I see danger. I see sacrifice. But perhaps if you just undo the blouse.
The girl must be brought to me immediately.
A dingo! The dingo's got my baby!
Tonight, we will paint the town with blood.
And not if I ask you about history! Though it hath no tongue, will speak with most miraculous organ. For the sake of humanity, you must die. Time's up.
Now that is the greatest cult film ever made in this country, possibly the world. And for our international viewers and listeners, they'd all be aware of Bondi Rescue.
Yeah.
It is shot at the Bondi Pavilion in the 80s with a myriad of incredible actors and performers. And of course, the one thing I neglected to say in the beginning is you're a profound actor as well, Haydn.
Yes, you played the mad scientist there.
Yeah. Look, I only took that role on because the great New Zealand actor Bruno Lawrence, who was destined to play the role of Doctor, the Mad Doctor, had a family. His mother got extremely sick and he had to return to New Zealand. So we were a week out and I thought, oh, I'll have to do it.
Yeah, you'll have to step in.
I did.
Yeah. And you can get Pandemonium from Smart Street Films as well.
The greatest tragedy
it's all there.
Is that the National Archives, because you've had to be a maverick director outside of the funding body, that the National Archives doesn't see this as the most important piece of history.
Yeah.
Both your films Going Down, Pandemonium, and many more are time capsules on the history of this country in the 20th century. Incredible time capsules. And if there's anyone listening from any of those film funding bodies, tonight you need to write the letter to demand that these films are restored and protected for history.
Yep.
My pleasure. If anyone is overseas is looking for quality films for their festivals, for their releases, please.
That's right. You did send that Pandemonium to Disney, didn't you? They wanted to have a look at it.
They did. Yes.
They said amazing film, but there's no way that Disney's ever going to be able to show that.
No.
We can't.
But they
put it on
paid
the
for the
Disney
freight,
Channel.
so I can't complain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hayden, when we talk to you, hours can disappear and they feel like seconds. It is such a privilege, and we feel very proud knowing you and taking this part of your valuable time for our podcast, Down South Anomalies. It's been an honor to have you on the show today.
My pleasure.
And we certainly wish you all the best in the future. We know that you just don't stop. You're in your 70s and you're still going. You've got a huge project coming up.
Yes,
which involves lots
England,
of travel
soon?
and being the cinematographer and everyone.
Yep.
You're doing it all by yourself, aren't you?
Yep.
It's it's a diary piece that I'm hoping it's going to have a little bit of Chris Marker, Sans Soleil about it.
Okay. Yep.
So both of us, we don't know what the hell you're talking about there at all.
Marker is a Canadian filmmaker from the 60s.
Okay.
It's Sans Soleil, which means sunless. And it was a revolutionary breakthrough in narrative. He's got an obsession with cats. So there's a lot of cats in it. But have a look at Chris Marker, Sunless, or Sans Soleil. But I'm hoping to make a diary piece about a group of boys who grew up in an environment that was fluid, encouraging, and had no racism, no religious separation, and no class separation. And they were boys from Iran, Ghana, Nigeria, Somalia, North America, Vietnam, and me from Australia. So I've found them all over the world, and I'm going to find out how those seminal years affected the rest of their lives, if they did. So it'll be interesting to see.
That would be very interesting. It's almost like 7 Up. It's a little
yeah,
bit
well,
like
this is
7
70 Up.
Yeah, 70 Up.
So, I mean, I'm we have to be careful that there's not just a whole lot of old blokes talking about how great they were. Because the thing I'm interested in is, are there lessons that can be learned from this school and its manner of teaching that can be applied in a world that is so fraught and divided in the 21st century? The little school was multicultural before the word was invented, and it was only after people left the school and went to secondary schools that they realized that racism existed. Right. And in many ways, I think there are some lessons that we can learn about how we educate and raise children. And that's what I hope will give it a contemporary feel, so it's not just a home movie about a whole lot of old farts talking about themselves.
I love the way you're always perpetually introspective and you've got so much humility. And when we did Bondi Wood, the one thing I realized there were some really huge names that are shakers and movers in the industry and they would do anything for you because they realize just that extraordinary friendship and that powerful creativity of you and your wife Gay together
and your integrity.
It's just something that's just so remarkable. I'm stumbling to find words to express how much it means to us. It's an inspiration to us. And I think
I find you guys inspiring without pissing in each other's pockets too much.
All right.
And on that note,
I think you've got to find people who inspire and encourage, and the bottom line is you don't always get it right.
No.
But it's how you respond to getting it wrong.
Yes.
And I think it's really important that you tell them the way you feel. And when I feel now on my timeline, with time running out, it's more important than ever. Now, there is a 18-second clip I want to play that exemplifies all this. It was shot in your local area, and it's the ad you did for Bondi Wood for Curbside Motors.
Bondi Beach, world-renowned for sun, surf and curbside motors. Our skilled and friendly staff are here to help with all your motoring needs.
I'm not. He might be, but
I'm not either.
Curbside Motors, for the motorist of discretion.
That ad harks back to a greater Australia for me, and real people.
That was like Steptoe and Son, but it was Steptoe and Steptoe.
They're absolute scoundrels, those two. Are they
a garage? They are a
fix
garage.
Up cars. They buy cars for you. There's a bit of dope gets sold, and the extraordinary thing is that one of those guys was found to be in possession of the Japanese flag that Dawn Fraser stole at the Olympic Games in Tokyo. And
they've got connections
for 50 years.
They've got connections.
It's now in the National Museum.
Okay.
Now, I was going to use this time to play a piece by a witchcore band. Can you believe this genre, called Salem? And they exemplify all that is wrong with Middle America. They're two boys and a girl that have come from broken families where parents have died early from addiction. They've become fentanyl addicts themselves, but they do seem to reflect back in a mutated Norman Rockwell way what is at the heart of the collapse.
Don't forget that several of the judges from the Salem witch trials then went on to found Harvard University.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Which is probably one of the greatest military training bases in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's a whole other story. They do a track. We're not going to play the track. We just don't want copyright strife. People go out and look. They haven't done an album in 12 years. They've given away lots of their material for free. The track is called Red River. And what it does, it shows where surveillance has gone today and how easy it is to do it electronically. Just maybe play again.
Yeah, a little bit.
We're
going to play play a little bit of it and have a look at it.
Let's break it. Let's go there.
You guys are met.
Red river, wash over me. Red river, wash over me. I would never speak for you, 'cause I got more respect than that. These snakes get off the ground, wrap around their brother's neck for that. I would never claim no prophecy, 'cause I know man too small for it. These vultures circle around the dead and want a crown for it. Sing the same song, but it's different work, no. Salt your own grounds, now nothing will grow. Wash over me, angels with burning wings, watch over me.
Wow.
As you can see.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you're a fan of witchcore.
Don't worry about an ASIO file. We're all
facial recognition.
We're masked. There was funnily enough, I saw an exhibition by a Russian woman in the 1920s, a painter, and she took her art out into the street and made herself an art object with stripes and Mondrian sort of colours and face adornment, and that beats facial recognition. It breaks up the planes of the face.
That's right.
A
Apparently,
Z and a black, and it can't work out what it's looking at.
Yeah, right.
So I recommend
Apparently,
everyone get out there and paint their faces
paint your face.
in
Apparently,
separate stripes.
if you wear really big sunglasses,
Jackie O ones,
big black sunglasses over your, really big ones, it can't, measure your eyes and your nose stuff, and they can't. So
Well, that thing with
they'll probably outlaw them.
The skeleton things at the end with the green is actually looking at your gait.
Exactly.
The way you move,
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Someone told me they were you cross the street against a red light in a couple of cities in China, and your name and face and age and everything will be on a TV screen before you get to the other side of the road.
Wow.
Incredible. And you know what? That actual technology is being used by anomalous researchers at haunted sites. And they found that the new Tesla cars that actually have infrared sensors around them, people have been parking them at graveyards, and they come into the car, there's nothing visually in front of them, but on the sensor, you've got that stick man that is actually capturing the out. Now, this is from Persons of Interest. So still you came up with, is this an early version of that where you actually use a texter to mark in the number of the dissident that you're actually tracking?
No, that's ASIO.
Yeah.
And that's an ASIO photograph of number 7 there is Meredith Bergman, who became an anti-apartheid protester and the president of the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament. And what that is an ASIO photograph. And when you look at the bottom of the photograph, which you can't see here, you'll see it'll have 7, Meredith Bergman, and then her ASIO file number, 8. The 3 is Sekai Holland, a South African or Rhodesian activist. So they're the keys of they take all the photographs. And if you've got a number next to you, you've got a file.
You've got a file.
Here's another odd piece of serendipity. Today is the day that everyone's been expecting massive revelations, as yet again a slightly less redacted list of Epstein's acquaintances comes out through. But really, what's it show more than often? I think Clinton's got about 360 trips on the plane, and Michael Jackson was seen somewhere. Here's an interesting still. During Epstein's incarceration, that suspectedly, was it a suicide? I don't think so.
Well,
here's an odd shot of Ghislaine during that time, sitting outside a burger joint, and I believe she was reading something like Philip R.G.'s memoir that she held to the camera. Since when does someone on the run set themselves up with a shot outside a burger joint? That just blew my mind of how crazy that was. Can you just go back up to the stills?
No, I want
that's entitlement for you, mate.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is there.
What's
just go
that?
down. That's it. Just there. Let's play that. Here's a very odd piece.
This was from today?
I think it's from today. I could be wrong, but it looks like Megyn Kelly, after responding to what was released in the files, this is her statement in the US today.
It's all fascinating, and we're not done with Jeffrey Epstein. I can tell you that for a fact. Can't tell you how I know, but I can tell you for a fact we're going to hear a lot more about Jeffrey Epstein in the coming year, and you may be even hearing from him directly. More on that as I'm allowed to tell you.
There you go.
You're not suggesting he's coming back from the grave, are you?
I don't think he ever went to the grave.
Isn't that interesting? Well, who knows? And we could have got the entire timeline wrong there. But what a way to end this program with the extraordinary Haydn Keenan. I mean, one thing we skipped over is there was an incredible exhibition done in the end based on Persons of Interest. Tell us about that quickly.
Yeah, I curated an exhibition at the Police and Justice Museum in Sydney, and it gives a pretty good cross section of the files, the methods, the media that ASIO used, and it was a salutary experience in working with New South Wales government bureaucrats, cultural bureaucrats who were. I've always had to distrust them ever after that exhibition, where my name ended up as tiny and their names ended up in 100 point, even though we did all the work and supplied all the background. So it was one of those things where you thought, that's a lesson I've learned. But it was incredibly popular. It rated much more than any of their other stuff, and it was people respond to it because they can see themselves. You only have to do just a tiny thing and you fall on the other side of the fence, and it's your face they're recognizing and cataloging.
It looks brilliantly put together. It looked absolutely stunning visually.
It was. It was. It was a great couple of months' work, and seeing people flooding through the place and responding to it was really fantastic.
Well, look, we can't thank you enough for your time. We've literally gone
we've
double
got to go.
time.
Wow.
We've got to go. But Haydn Keenan, people can get in touch with you. We will make sure that your website and also your YouTube channel is linked in our show notes. And thank you so much for your time and who you are as a person. We really appreciate everything about you, Haydn.
My pleasure, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank
it's
you.
A real
Thank
pleasure.
you. Absolutely appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's
bye-bye.
Yeah, that's it for the program this week, and we'll be back next week with
maybe hopefully
God knows,
with
don't say anything.
Don't say it. Don said he'd give us an interview.
Yeah, well, he's gone to ground. So anyway,
all right,
we'll see what happens next week, but we'll be back next week with another show.
It doesn't get better than this guy, though.
No, it
really
doesn't.
doesn't.
All right, kids. Bye.